and welcome to The Capsule Life, a show for the most casual and dedicated fans of comics and a member of the Comic Watch family. I'm your host, Sean. Join me and discover what the world of comics and graphic novels have to offer. From one-on-one interviews with industry professionals, roundtable discussions with passionate fans, and reviews on the latest comics, TV shows, and movies. Now let's dive right on in. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight in a special YouTube live episode. Our episode is going to be a little bit different tonight, and before we discuss that, I do want to highlight our episode spotlight today, and that is Bat Lessons Podcast. They are a Batman history podcast that covers characters, stories, writers, artists, movie directors, business, politics, and more. Everything in and around Batman. They start at the very beginning and work their way chronologically through 80 years of Batman. So if you want to check them out, I really love this podcast. I've actually just recently been a guest on their show, and I think they do fantastic work. It's one of my favorite podcasts I love listening to. So if you're interested in checking this podcast out, I will definitely put a link in the show notes below for you all. So let's talk a little bit about today's episode. If you listened to last week's episode 101, you'll probably heard me say that Matt Kent is going to come on the show to talk about one of his latest comic books that he created, Mr. Mammoth. Unfortunately, he emailed me last night saying that he had COVID and that he wasn't going to be able to come on the show. So we're going to try to reschedule for him to come on the show. But because of that, I was trying to figure out what can we talk about to make sure that we have an episode for y'all to listen to. And because that Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse movie is coming out, which, by the way, next week's episode is going to be a review of that movie with Ellie from the All Day Show, I thought it might be fun to talk about the origin stories and first appearances of Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen, and Spider-Man 2099, Miguel O'Hara, since they're going to be in the movie. And then when I started researching this a little bit this morning, I realized I don't know much about their origin stories in the comics, and it took me a long time to kind of figure out where their origin stories are really being told at. So I decided that I was going to focus a little bit more on the first appearances and kind of have a general discussion about their origin stories. And I thought it would be fun to go to YouTube Live because I know there's so many of you out there who are probably very well versed in their origin stories. And so going on YouTube Live allows you to be part of the discussion. I'll make sure to share your comments during the episode. And for those of you who are listening to the podcast version of that, unfortunately, you will be able to engage in the conversation since this has already been recorded. And as you can probably tell, there probably won't be a whole lot of editing, unfortunately, because of that. So you might hear some, mess ups with this. And so I apologize in advance. But I want to let you know that I do have a special guest joining us today, and that person is the editor-in-chief of Comic Watch, Matt Meyer. Matt, how you doing today?
Hey, Sean, thank you for having me. I know I feel bad knowing that you couldn't get Matt Kent. I hope that he gets to feeling better soon. Thankfully, we're well past the point where COVID is, COVID. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. The lesser of two Matts.
Thank you. Yeah, and he said that this was like his first time getting it, so he's this is like really brand new to him and all that. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you jumping on the show at the last minute. You were really enthusiastic when I asked people if anyone wanted to come on the show, and you were right on top of it. And I appreciate you coming on the show to talk about this, and I also appreciate your patience because I know I said we were going to start at a certain time, and I had to push it back a little bit because I was working all day to kind of get all this figured out because I wasn't planning on going live, and I thought it'd be a lot of fun to do it this year. So before we start talking about first appearances of Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen, and Miguel O'Hara, we have a few comments have come in already. You're the Collector said, let's go. I know he's really excited about watching this. He actually tweeted me and asked when we were going to go live. Anthony Bergamini from Comic Watch gave some applause emoji as well. And then You're the Collector said, no apologies needed. We love it live and unedited. I know a lot of people really enjoyed that, so I appreciate hearing that. Thank you very much. Matt, before we talk about our episode topic tonight, I want to ask you, first of all, you've been on the show before. I've actually had you on the show back in September, I believe, to talk about Comic Watch, and that was when we first started to have the Caption Life kind of fall under the Comic Watch family umbrella. And I want to ask you, what is your origin story with Spider-Man or any of these characters, of Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen, Miguel O'Hara? What's your origin story with these characters? How did you get introduced to them?
Okay, Spider-Man, take it back to 93, Maximum Carnage. I was 13. Up till that point, I was only reading X-Men. I was curious to branch out a little bit, had no idea who. I knew who Spider-Man was, so I picked up this issue of Amazing Spider-Man number 378. And it's got Spidey watching Carnage and Venom duke it out as drawn by Mark Bagley. And that was it. I was hooked. So
nice.
I mean, really, in a very small nutshell, that's my Spidey origin story. I love the character. He's relatable. He's the original everyman hero. And he just set that mold. And to me, because of that, he's one of like the 3 or 4 most important superheroes ever invented, period.
Yep. He is the most popular one in the world as well, too, actually.
Sure.
Yeah, they did some sort of survey. I forget how they figured it out, but it's really interesting because I think, if I remember correctly, Spider-Man is the most popular superhero, I think, in like 25 or 27 countries. And then second place was Wonder Woman with like 8 or 7 or something like that. So it's like a huge difference with that. So he's a very popular character. I know for me, comic wise, I didn't really get into reading Spider-Man comics until recently when I, decided to read comics again as an adult. But for the character, I was in high school when the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies came out. And so I was familiar with Spider-Man already because of, when you're growing up, you see all these characters and all these heroes either in toys or animated shows or things like that. But my first like really vivid memory was that movie, especially with my cousin, because I remember he was a huge Spider-Man fan. And I remember when we walked out of that movie, he would tell me that, all the things that were like really, really great, but then he would tell me like what's very different from in the movie from the comics as well too. And I remember very distinctively like the web shooters, like that was the biggest thing people talked about. Like
the Green Goblin is not a Power Rangers villain in comics.
Yeah. All those things. Yeah. So that was my introduction to Spider-Man. And then to be honest, Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen, and Spider-Man 2099, I feel like I probably knew of them. Like Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy as Spider-Gwen are relatively new, right? Like Miles Morales was created in 2011, so about 12 years ago. I think Gwen Stacy as Spider-Gwen was created around 2014, so they're relatively new. Yeah. Spider-Man 2099 has been around since the 90s, but I think really, yeah. And I think really my introduction to them was probably, the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie, because I think I've always heard about the characters.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
But let me just say, how great is that this one film is introducing you and so many other viewers to these great characters. How many doors are getting opened to young minds and young viewers and older readers and viewers just by learning about these characters and watching them interact on the big screen? Like, that's awesome.
Agreed. Yeah, and my son, his favorite superhero right now is Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and because of that movie and just because of everything else that's came out of that, the video game that PlayStation came out with 2 or 3 years ago. And by the way, the second game looks Spider-Man 2 looks like it's going to be amazing. But that game was just phenomenal. Yeah. But that game was just phenomenal. I remember playing it and I loved not only the gameplay of it, but like the story that they put into it, because they did such a great job in the first Spider-Man movie, and I felt like they amped it up in the Miles Morales video game as well too. So it's just like you said, it's opened up a lot of possibilities and a lot of new audiences to this character. And I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many things I can go into with the movie in terms of like how phenomenal it is beyond just the film, but the film itself is also just amazing, and storytelling and the animation and everything. It's gorgeous. But yeah, so that's good to know our Spider-Man origin stories. Real quick in the comments, You're the Collector said, yes, Matt, thank you for saving this podcast, is what he said.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah.
I somewhat, I sense there's a hint of sarcasm there.
Yeah. No, he's just
you'd have done just
joking,
fine
yeah.
without me, buddy.
Yeah.
You'd have done okay.
Yeah. Gabriel De Jesus from Comic Watch said live shows are the best shows.
Yes. Absolutely.
You're the Collector said my first Spider-Man comic was Rain. And then he said off. LOL. It's OOOFFF. I don't know if that's like if you meant like oof or if it's supposed to be like rain off with like an extended.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess it's oof.
Yes.
There's something very, very infamous about Spider-Man Rain, and if you know what it is, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Don't know what it is, this is a family-friendly podcast, and I'm going to tell you, just Google it on your own.
Yes. Sounds good. Gabriel De Jesus said Spider-Man Unlimited cartoon for Miguel was his introduction to the character, which I forgot. Okay. Yeah, I forgot that's where he's appeared at before. I actually never seen any of the Spider-Man animated shows when they came out.
I saw the one from the 90s, of course.
Yeah, I never saw that one. Like I've never seen.
Oh wow!
Yet.
Yeah, it was cool, man. It was. I mean, X-Men would come on, and then bang, Spider-Man. Yeah, great time. Fox Kids.
Anthony Bergamini said, Ultimate Spider-Man will always be my favorite iteration of the character. Then Introduction Miles builds on everything, creating an amazing new character, and Death of Peter Parker gets me every time I read it.
Yeah, we're hey Berg, we're gonna get into that. Don't just put a pin in that, buddy.
Yes, yeah, and you know, it's interesting, and just to say we'll get into this, but how much the Ultimate Comics is going to be incorporated here and the movie and things like that. And what's interesting is I've never read the entire Ultimate Comics, but I read the first one because someone asked me to do that as a review on a TikTok video, and I read it, and I got to tell you, when I read that, and then I read the Miles Morales, #1 issue when he had his first appearance, I saw a lot of like overlap and similarities with the storytelling that they had, and which makes sense because they were created by the same person. So
yeah, and same writer of both. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So now, I remember reading. I was like, "Haven't I read this already?"
Small asterisk though. That Miles Morales #1 was not his first appearance. His first appearance was in Ultimate Fallout #4.
Right. Yes, and that's actually what. Let's go ahead and dive into that because that was the first thing I was actually going to say.
Start with Miles?
Yeah. So just like you said, technically his first full appearance was Ultimate Fallout #4. And to explain for people who don't know what that issue is about, so there was this whole storyline with the Ultimate Marvel Comics, which is basically a different universe. So everybody knows that Marvel Universe, the main universe, is Earth 616, but the Ultimate Universe, it takes place on Earth 1610, I believe. Yes. And in this issue, or in this story of like the Ultimatum Fallout, I think is what it's called, right?
No. Don't ever conflate Ultimatum with anything good. No, Ultimate Fallout.
Right, exactly. And so basically, you know, what happens in that event that's talking about the Fallout is one of the things that happens is that Peter Parker as Spider-Man actually dies in that event. And so issue #4 of Ultimate Fallout is like, I think a series of like 3 or 4 character like previews or snippets. Because I know it opens like with Reed Richards for a few pages, and then Charles Xavier is in there for a few pages, and then the issue ends with a Spider-Man fighting a villain, I think Kangaroo, which, by the way, like, you know, all of Spider-Man's villains is like some sort of animal, so I imagine at some point PETA's probably going to come after him at some point, right? But he's like, everyone sees Spider-Man and doesn't know anything about what's going on when this first came out, but sees Spider-Man fighting Kangaroo, and I'm sure everybody was like, wait, what's going on? I thought he had died in the event that happened. And then the very last page, you see Spider-Man take off his mask, and it's a completely new Spider-Man, and that's Miles Morales. So that's technically his actual first appearance, but I thought that because that was so short, and you really only got to see Miles at the end, and you don't know anything else about him other than that he, took on a villain at this point, and everyone said that his suit was in bad taste because Spider-Man is already dead and all that.
Yeah,
I thought,
which was a great touch.
Yeah, oh yeah. I thought that what we could do is actually start with his first full appearance, which is Ultimate Comics Spider-Man issue #1 that came out in September 2011. Now, Matt, it sounds like you know quite a bit about this issue. Do you want to kind of share what this issue is about? Just kind of do a summary of it, or has it been a while?
It's been a cool minute, but I'm gonna break it down as best I can. So this to kind of fill in some blanks a little bit. The ultimate iteration of Peter Parker died, and he died heroically fighting the Sinister Six. They'd found out his identity. They'd come to kill him and at his and Aunt May's home, and he has to protect her, and he has and beat the villains. And what's even worse about this is he's been shot. On his way swinging there, he got into the middle of a scuffle between the Ultimates and the Punisher, and the Punisher shot him. And so he's already gravely wounded and has to now fight all six, the Green Goblin and everybody. And he wins. And in true Spider-Man fashion, even when he wins, he loses because a stray spark sets off an explosion behind him and it takes his life. And then the issue ends with the ghost of Uncle Ben walking him into the light and telling him that he did a really good job. And it's so heartbreaking. It is perfect. Just wow. And I could probably spend this whole episode just talking about how much I love Ultimate Spider-Man. I won't do that. But then this opens the door for Miles Morales. Now, Miles Morales is a very different character because he's got his Spidey powers. There are some differences. He's got electrical powers for one. He's got a camouflage ability for another. And I should know this, but I don't believe he has spider sense. So that's a big difference right there. But Miles is from a happy home. He's half black, half Puerto Rican. There's no tragedy in his life, right?
Right.
And what we find out is, because as a reader, as I'm reading through his first arc, is I'm waiting for the Uncle Ben moment, so to speak. Where, here's the tragedy that spurs young Miles on and, history repeats, blah, blah. It doesn't happen. It took me, as a reader, a minute to realize, Peter's death is the thing that he's becoming a hero from.
Right.
Or inspired by. And that right there it creates this something that's a relatively new dynamic in Marvel, but old hat for DC, and that's the legacy hero.
Right. Yeah. And
so Miles does his thing. He never loses his dad. His mom does wind up getting killed at one point before Secret Wars miniseries of 2015, 2016. That merged him with the 616 universe, and she came back, so she got better. It was okay, but there's never that moment where his life is defined by tragedy, and that's the profound difference between Miles and Peter. Is he doesn't have the weight of that baggage.
Exactly. Yeah, and the moment for Miles where he it's really interesting because when that whole thing was going on, that actually ends up being issue 4 or 5 where he goes and sees what's happens with Peter Parker and sees his death. And that was his moment because when he first got the powers, he said he didn't want the powers. He didn't want to, be a superhero. He just wanted to be a normal kid because in the series here, he's actually a grade school. I think he's probably in middle school.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
When he starts off, he's middle school. I think the character's more in high school age now.
yes, yeah,
I've lost
definitely.
a little bit of track of where Miles is in more recent years.
Right. Yeah, but when all this is happening, when Peter Parker dies, this is all when he's in middle school, and
Yeah.
so he just got into. So in issue one, one of the things that you find out with Miles is that his parents wanted him to go into the charter school for Brooklyn, which is called Brooklyn Visions Academy.
Yes.
And so, he worked really hard to get a chance for it. If you know anything about charter schools, it's a lottery system. And so, even if you did really well, you still have to be selected by random in order to get into the school. And fortunately enough, he did. And what's funny is that his number was 42. And that was also the same number of the spider that bit him later on in the issue. That was from Alchemax, which is the company that that Norman Osborn owned or ran or operated or whatnot. So that was the same number that the genetically mutated spider had that ended up biting Miles. So this kind of like a little play of fate there. And so he was in middle school, wanted to just be a normal kid. He's starting this new life and, didn't know like how he's going to be able to do all this. But then when, Peter Parker dies, he got this enormous guilt on him, feeling that he could have done something to help, and that if he was, if he decided to help instead of saying that he didn't want this, maybe he could have saved Spider-Man from dying. And so, just like you said, that was definitely his Uncle Ben moment. That was something that definitely happens, I think, in issue like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
In issue 1, kind of going back to the creators of this. So, Miles Morales is created by Brian Michael Bendis and Sarah Pichelli, which I think I'm saying that last name correctly.
I believe you are.
Yeah, and Brian Michael Bendis is known for writing Ultimate Spider-Man with Peter Parker, so he's already familiar and has been involved with this. He also wrote in the all-new X-Men, which is funny because Iceman makes an appearance in issue number 2, and it's the Iceman that he created, I think, if I remember correctly, because it has like the little bandana and all that. It's a very brief cameo. He's not in it for very long. It's like one panel he's in there.
Okay, yeah, that would have been the ultimate Iceman, because great. Sorry. My dog is talking in his sleep over here. It's kind of comical. Sorry about that. No, that if it was in the second issue, that would have been the ultimate version of Iceman.
Right. And that's not the all new X-Men? Is that different?
Do what?
Is that not the all new X-Men? Is that different?
No.
Or? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. So anyways, yeah, so in that issue, it starts off with the first few pages very reminiscent of the first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man, because in both of these issues, Brian Michael Bendis have wrote in that Norman Osborn is talking to somebody at Alchemax, and he gives like the same speech basically. He's talking about the whole story of I think Athena and Arachne. And talking about, what happened with those two and all that. And the same, story. What's funny is that in the scientists he's talking to are two different ones, because they're, he's talking about two different spiders basically that end up biting, Peter Parker and Miles Morales. It was just funny that he pretty much used the same story that Norman Osborn gave as like kind of the, the compelling speech that he's going to tell people about, why spiders are so significant and things like that. So, so it starts off with that. And then, later you find out that that actually the story or the issue, it opens up with saying that was like 11 months prior or something like that. And then it kind of skips ahead to like present day, and by this time not only is Spider-Man dead, but Norman Osborn is dead as well too. And you see the Prowler, who, if you've watched the movie, you know that Aaron Davis, who is Miles' uncle, is the one that's the Prowler. But at this point, we don't know that yet. But he's in that abandoned, warehouse or abandoned scientific lab, stealing, money and jewels from a safe. But that's how the spider from that laboratory actually got into his bag. And then later on, when Miles finds out that he gets into school, he goes and visits his uncle and tells him all about it. But that's how he get bit by the spiders, because the spider came out from the bag and got onto Miles. And what's different from this in the movie is that the movie shows him getting bit, and then like he just kind of killed the spider and whopped it off. In this issue, he actually has like a major reaction that he passes out and is like foaming at the mouth, and then all of a sudden like he comes to and he's totally fine, right? So the issue ends with Miles' dad showing up at the apartment. he's getting to like a argument with Aaron, saying like, why is he over here? And then he looks around and sees that Miles is gone. And at the very last panel, Miles is like outside the apartment building, but all of a sudden he turns invisible. And like that's how the issue ends, is that you see that his very first power is that camouflage power that he got from the spider. So it was a really interesting first appearance. And I think it was really cool just to kind of set up the stage of who he was as a person, as a character, and what some things that he was kind of facing as a middle schooler before, he got bit by a spider. But it kind of hits the ground running from that point as well, too.
Did the first issue set up that Miles's father is a policeman?
Not yet. Like
I did not remember.
Yeah, so last night when I was reading this, first of all, I really enjoyed it. Like after I read issue number 1, like I couldn't stop, but I couldn't help myself stop reading the next issues because they were just really good. That I kept, especially when you have Marvel Unlimited, because that's where I was reading at. It just says like, do you want to read the next issue? I'm like, yes, please. And I just kept going, so it's really easy to get sucked into that. But yeah, I think I read the first 5 or 6 issues and I didn't get the sense that he was a police officer from any of those issues yet. Okay. So, yeah.
Because, one of the things, later. Like, that's one of the big reasons why there's so much tension between him and Uncle Aaron.
Right.
They're literally on opposite sides of the law.
Yeah. Well, and I think in issue 2, when his dad sits down with him and tells him, what happened to both him and his father, how they both went to jail. I think even then I don't think he said that he's a police officer. Like he talks about like how he changed his life and how he met his mom and wants his son to be, to have the best life possible. All that. I don't think it's still known to us that he is a police officer just yet. So, yeah. Okay, so that's the first appearance of Miles Morales. Let me see what the comments say here, and then we can talk about those, and then hop into Spider-Gwen. Let's see here. You're the Collector said, Ultimate Spider-Man gave his clone Jessica Drew, who ultimately handed Miles and his Spider-Man costume. And yes, I think that happened in issue 3 or 4, and that was a really cool moment. He got to meet, like, the Ultimates is what they call themselves. They didn't call them Avengers, but they called themselves the Ultimates. Yeah. But Nick Fury was there. Tony Stark was there. Hawkeye was there. So we did see that a little bit later on, and that was part of the Clone Saga. He also said that Miles has a great sense of humor, quick with the jokes and banter. And I don't think we see Genki in this issue. I think Genki shows up in issue number 2. What's funny about Genki is he's also really comical in that one, but he always wears like some sort of obscure Marvel character t-shirt. So like the first one is Frogman, and then the second shirt that he wears in issue 3 is Howard the Duck. So I love their relationship and I love their comedy. But yeah, Miles is definitely has that sense of humor.
Positive, healthy friendships. That's another big difference between Miles and Peter.
Yes.
It's also really weird to me that Ned in the MCU Spider-Man movies is very obviously Genki, but they call him Ned Leeds for whatever reason. That's never made sense to me.
That I'm glad you pointed that out because, like, after watching all the Spider-Man movies in MCU and all this stuff, I'm like, it seems like it's very much the same character between the two, and I don't know if that's what they're.
It doesn't make any sense to call him Ned Leeds because he's Genki, and B, he's nothing like Ned Leeds.
Yeah, so that's what I've heard from people. Yeah,
why they make these choices.
Anthony Bergamini said Miles also quits being Spider-Man for a bit after his mom dies, but then comes back a few years later. Then Secret Wars happens and changes everything. So just like what you said. And Peter and Norman comes back later is always a sore spot for me. Miles didn't need Peter to give him the okay to be Spider-Man. That is already established by Peter's supporting cast. And he said, but
that's
good.
That's actually something that I wanted to touch on was the fact that Aunt May and Mary Jane at one point, I cannot remember where it is, but they meet Miles and give him their blessing to continue being Spider-Man and upholding Peter's legacy.
Right.
Which I thought was just great.
Yeah. I haven't got to that part yet. So this is all kind of
spoiler.
But this is like years ago, so it's like I'm not gonna get upset if like anything spoiled for me. Like this is years ago.
Yeah, it creates really solid connective tissue between the Ultimate Peter era and the Miles era.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it feel like more of an organic story.
Right. And then Anthony went on to say Spider-Man 2 shows that Peter has returned to being Spider-Man at some point. So who knows what Bendis is planning or was planning. And then Year of the Collector said, I'm there with you guys. I read all my Ultimate Comics issue in one setting. Pretty good storytelling and art too. Yeah. And that's one of the other things I actually want to say about this issue before we move on to Spider-Gwen is that one of the first things I realized and noticed when I was reading this is the art, right? And the reason why I noticed this is because the art is very much what you see in the Spider-Man Across this or Into the Spider-Verse animation. So first of all, the movie, they made a point to make sure that it was a combination of CGI and hand-drawn animation. And so that's what gives it like its really unique look. But the filmmakers have said that they also want to make sure that they brought in a lot of inspiration from this original series. And there was a lot of the pointillism that you see with like the backgrounds and even in like, the character drawings and stuff like that with the little dots that you see in the movie is very much straight from this series as well too, because I remember just reading through this, I'm like, this is just like the kind of art style that you see in the movie. And so I was really happy to see that they brought in a lot of the inspiration from the original art here into the movie. And I think that's really what gives it one of the best things about the movies was being able to use that art style, and it's great to see that connection there.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. All right, so let's dive into the first appearance of Spider-Gwen. So as many people know, Spider-Gwen is Gwen Stacy, and Gwen Stacy is actually a character that's been around a long time as a character in the Earth 616 Spider-Man universe, and was a love interest of Spider-Man and Peter Parker as well too.
Oh, she was the love interest for Peter Parker.
Yes, exactly. Until like I think the 70s when they killed her off there, or something like that. But yeah,
73.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is her first appearance as Spider-Gwen, and what's interesting about this is if you're watching the YouTube video, I have the cover of her first issue of where she appears. It's The Edge of Spider-Verse 2014, issue number 2, but she's actually known as Spider-Woman in her Earth, which is Earth 65. So yes. I think the name Spider-Gwen comes out a little bit later, but she's known as Spider-Woman here, and she's created by Jason Latour and Robbie Rodriguez. And so let's talk about this a little bit. What I find interesting about this story is that I think a lot of the Spider characters that we get all have a very similar origin story, right? They got, bit or, something happened with the spider, then they got those powers, right? Same thing here with Spider-Gwen, but what's interesting is that in the first page, they didn't really dive into her origin story. They had like these little images of like what happened to her. So they had the images of, Spider biting her hand. And then, I guess Peter Parker, was never Spider-Man in her universe, but he was this nerdy high school kid, and he was inspired by her to try to, become a hero. So he made some sort of chemical that turned him into Lizard, which I thought was interesting because in the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, they never said that, right? Like Gwen just said that, he died and that she couldn't save him, but you didn't find out from the movie that he actually turned into the Lizard. So I thought that was kind of an interesting twist that they had there. And then that was kind of it. Like they didn't really, dive into or have her explain it. It was just like these little images with a couple of dialogue boxes, and they just went straight into the story. So I think that was kind of interesting, but it made sense in that they probably gave her just a similar origin story because all the other Spider characters did, but they probably didn't want to just like, let's just do this again. Let's just give one page, like quick jump it through, and then let's just go ahead and go in the story. So I thought that was kind of interesting they did that. I don't know, Matt, if you've read this, if you had like kind of a similar thought to that or not.
Yeah, I do. I mean, when I think about Spider-Gwen, and just for clarity's sake, I'm going to refer to her as that, even though she's technically Spider-Woman. Or I guess she's Ghost Spider now, but whatever.
Yeah.
We're not talking about now. We're talking about when she first showed up.
Right.
So there's just lots of really neat, like quarter turn twists on things that you're familiar with throughout her origin, right? Mm-hmm. Like Peter is the Uncle Ben that dies, and her dad is kind of functions like a Commissioner Gordon in a way.
Yeah.
because he's still a cop and all that good stuff. And then, little things throughout, like eventually in her first or second miniseries, I forget which, like Daredevil is or Matt Murdock, your guy, is the Kingpin's main henchman.
Yes.
And he's got all his DD powers, and it's like, oh crap, what if Daredevil was a bad guy? You would be in trouble.
Right.
Because he would kick your ass 9 ways to Sunday.
Yep.
And then he could do that because then he could just go to Catholic church and confess and be fine.
Right, because that's how it works.
This is actually hey, wait a minute, our Daredevil is the bad guy.
Yeah.
But no, here's the thing that really gets me, that I love most about Spider-Gwen is, and by the way, I just double checked, Earth 65, that number is not a coincidence or just a random number. It was 1965 when she first appeared. So,
okay. Oh, that makes
little
sense.
trivia that I just Googled. But the thing I like about Spider-Gwen is she kind of almost retroactively gives Gwen Stacy this whole new agency, right? Because the death of Gwen Stacy casts such a long shadow over Spider-Man mythos for the last 50 years now, to the point that it's not hard to say that she's more important in death than she ever was in life. And right. I hate that. But at the same time, she doesn't have, Gwen Stacy, when she was alive, does not have a lot of her own agency. She pretty much fails the Bechdel test at every turn.
Yeah.
She's this cool, she's Peter Parker's girlfriend. That's her function. And it's unfortunate. So when we turn around and get Spider-Gwen, we kind of get this idea of who Gwen Stacy was between the panels,
right.
or who she could have been between the panels, rather.
Right.
And that's cool because Spider-Gwen's a cool chick. She plays drums in the Mary Janes with her friends.
Right.
She's smart at science. She's a science nerd.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's just got this whole fleshed out world of supporting characters and her own drama and rogues gallery. Like I was saying, there's the evil, maybe not evil Daredevil that she goes up against, and it's great. Robbie Rodriguez's art was such an awesome choice,
right,
for those early adventures. And personal failings of Jason Latour aside, he really, in those early runnings, created a sense of not just her, but of her world. And she comes in to existence feeling very fully formed.
Right.
Which, considering, like, similar to Ultimate Fallout number 4 for Miles, like, her first appearance was super low key.
Right.
It was one of the tie-in miniseries issues to the first Spider-Verse, which, by the way, handy dandy reading material. Yeah. So yeah, I just think she's a wonderful character. I'm not a fan of Ghost Spider as a name, although I understand why they made her something in like literally anything other than Spider-Woman, because they have like 17 of them running around already.
Right. Yeah. Right. But she was the only Spider-Woman in her Earth, though, which makes sense. But like when you're talking about, the larger universe of, the Spider-Verse and all that. Like,
right.
Yeah, you kind of do need to make that distinction. And Gabrielle in the comments said, was she ever known as SpiderGwen in canon? Because that ain't good secret identity keeping, which I agree.
That's a no.
Yeah. I was about to say, I think the comic series title was Spider-Gwen, but I don't think she was ever called that inside of the stories, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
Yeah. So, and what's interesting in this issue, again, with her first appearance, is that not only is she called Spider-Woman, but I think another major distinction between her and Spider-Man is that she is very much considered a dangerous vigilante in her world.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Spider-Man 616, the only person that really seems to not like him is his villains and J. Jonah Jameson. But it seems here that she already is like at a disadvantage because everyone sees her as being a dangerous vigilante, at least to begin with.
It's if you dive back into here and there throughout the first roughly 200 issues of Amazing Spider-Man,
Mm-hmm.
there's ebbs and flow of when Peter or Spider-Man is considered an outlaw or a danger to the police and to the general populace, right? So Aunt May always thinks he's a menace of some sort, although she's more from a fearful place than an angry place like J. Jonah Jameson.
Right.
But for all intents and purposes, like having Spider-Gwen be considered that outlaw and a danger to society is absolutely a very good throwback to like OG Spider-Man.
Right. Yeah. So that's so that was her first appearance, and it again, it's a really good one. The art style is very different. I gotta say, and this is something I've read before as well too. Her suit is definitely one of my favorite suits in the Spider-Verse, and I guess when the character,
it's a cool. I don't know if Robbie Rodriguez is credited with designing it or not.
Right.
I assume so.
Probably.
But
yeah. But I guess
whoever did, Robbie, apologies if it was you and I'm just not getting it. But yeah, kudos. That's a stellar outfit.
Yeah.
And it looks awesome animated.
And I guess when it first came out, when the suit was first, made the comic books, it was the most popular cosplay at comic conventions as well too, which I could totally see
it was
and
huge
understand.
that year.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely love it. I think it's really cool. It has the hood, and it has like a very different design. I love it. I think it's definitely my favorite spider suit out there.
Yeah, because it incorporates elements of the traditional Spidey look, but it does it in an absolutely unique way.
Right. Yes. Agreed.
It just jumps off the page at you.
Seth Romo from Comic Watch said, "It's wild to see or hear Matt. I've only known him as the digital omnipotent leader of Comic Watch. Very cool."
Hi, Seth. Hi, Anthony. Gabriel's podcast with me before, so I know he knows me.
Yeah. All right, so let's dive into Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099.
Snap. Here we go. 2099, baby.
Yes. And before we get into that, Gabriel reminded me that it's still popular at conventions. I agree. My cousin's daughter went as Spider-Gwen this year when we went to Indiana Comic-Con, and it's definitely Spider-Man in general is probably the most common, most popular cosplay I see at comic conventions. It's really,
I believe that.
Yeah, I mean it's it's cool because they all have like different styles that you can do and all that. So yeah, it's definitely very popular.
If I may get just absolutely lofty for a moment, the democratization of Spider-Man will never be a bad thing.
Yes, agreed. So Miguel O'Hara's first appearance as Spider-Man 2099 is in this comic book issue that came out in 1993 called 2099 Unlimited #1. It takes place in Earth 928, and it's created, and he was created by Peter David and Rick Leonardi. And what's interesting is when you look at the cover of itself, which for those of you who are listening to the podcast episode, it's a cover of Spider-Man 2099 that looks like he is fighting a Hulk-like creature. And it's really fascinating because he has like really long fingernails and has
that is Hulk
like
2099.
Yeah. So
let me just jump in.
Yeah.
My own spider sense was tingling a little bit there. So that is what you're describing as 2099 Unlimited #1 is Hulk 2099's first appearance.
Right.
So Miguel first shows up technically in the back pages of Amazing Spider-Man 365. They ran the first 4 or 6 issues or pages of the first issue of Spidey 2099, which came out shortly thereafter. So the Unlimited was a quarterly book. Marvel was real big on quarterly books at the time. So they had X-Men Unlimited, Spider-Man Unlimited, and basically these books, they were oversized. They shipped once every 3 months, essentially to fill in the fifth week gaps that would inevitably show up on the schedule. So if you had that way, you were never short of anything, and they wanted to hype it up and make it, seem like it was unique. But when you get down to brass tacks, that's kind of what it was. Right. So, and it did come out, I want to say probably a year or so after Spidey 2099 #1. I could be wrong on that.
Okay.
But by that point, they were really like gung-ho with the 2099 concept. That had launched super well. They had Spidey, they had they had Punisher 2099, which nobody understood that it was supposed to be a parody of Punisher, and it gets routinely mocked, and it very much shouldn't. And they had a new character named Ravage 2099, who was billed as being the first new character Stan Lee has invented in however many years. And he was trash. It's a very bad character. And then the sleeper hit book was Doom 2099.
Okay.
And the big hook there for a while was, is this guy actual Doctor Doom or just some nut that thinks he's Doctor Doom? Right. And so they kind of play around with that for a while. And then oddly, as hot as X-Men was at the time, they didn't do a 2099 version of X-Men until the year after. So mysteries for another time. Right. But Miguel O'Hara.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting with this being the premiere of Hulk 2099, so I just read this morning, and maybe I missed it, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's technically in the next issue, but I didn't see Hulk in this issue at all. It's very much a Miguel story. So unless he was like the character they have at the beginning, which by the way, they really amped up like how diabetes was going to be the death of people in this issue. Not that diabetes is not serious now, but they made it almost borderline like it was going to be like this new AIDS-like disease or something like that, the way they kind of treated it, which I thought was a little bizarre. But anyways, I know there's like a person in the beginning. Is Hulk 2099, is that still Bruce Banner, or is this somebody else?
No, totally new character.
Okay, gotcha. Because I know like there's other circles where Bruce lives a long time because of the Hulk, and so I didn't know if that was the same.
That would be Maestro. Boy, that's another one I could do a whole nother just episode talking about, is Peter David Hulk and / Maestro, but I won't get us too far afield.
Right, yeah. So what's interesting with this issue is that this is not an origin story for Miguel O'Hara. He's already Spider-Man 2099. The main villain in this issue that he's going up against is somebody named Mutagen, which is kind of like, I don't know how you would describe his powers other than, that's exactly it. Yeah.
I have not read this comic.
Okay. Yeah. So no, that's totally fine. Yeah. So Mutagen's power that he's going up against is kind of like some sort of evolutionary self-defense mechanism where, whenever he gets hit or whatever, like his body kind of absorbs it and then like transforms a little bit. So at one point you see his body turn into like this really hard bone-like shell as a protective response. So it's really interesting to kind of see that happen. And the villain Mutagen, you find out that his origin story is that he and his wife had a daughter who had a mysterious illness and died. And then that's like his villain story, right? Is that he goes off and tries to, make other people pay for it, basically.
Okay. Kind of standard villain fare in his own way.
Exactly, yeah. So with Miguel O'Hara, he's, talking to this woman that he works with. It's, it's 90s comics, so there's a lot of like, love tensions in there, and like they talk about how hot Miguel O'Hara looks and stuff like that, really focusing on the looks and everything. And then when Mutagen shows up on the scene, he jumps away to go into his Spider-Man 2099 suit and starts fighting him. In this issue, it seems like all the powers he has is very much the traditional Spider-Man, at least in this issue. So I don't know, Matt, I will be honest, I don't know much about Miguel O'Hara. Maybe you can shed light in terms of what his origin story, in terms of how he became Spider-Man and what kind of powers that he might have.
Well, so here is Spidey 2099 number 1.
Mm-hmm.
If we can cut down on the glare a little bit. And yeah, like you said, Peter David and Rick Leonardi. He is a product of science gone awry at the Alchemax Corporation, which we talked about as being original. Yes. Now, at the time that's the Norman Osborn tie is retroactive.
Okay.
They're just kind of a shady, scummy, catch-all big corporation in these original 2099 books. So Miguel O'Hara, which, by the way, just like brief aside, how great is the mixed ethnicity name there?
Right.
Spanish and Irish. That's awesome. His mom's alive. He's got a little brother. He's not really driven by tragedy or anything like that. He's a little bit of a rougher around the edges version of Spider-Man in that, like, instead of being able to stick to walls, he's got these talons that come up out of his fingertips and he crunches into the walls, which is pretty cool in and of itself.
Yeah.
Somebody will I hope somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think he has a spider sense. Okay. And yeah, it's really the especially those early those are like the first year or so of the 2099 books was really about building this world, and it very much had a feel of 90s cyberpunk gone wild, which anytime you read a comic about what the future is going to look like, it inevitably looks like the future version of whatever decade it's published in.
Right.
And that's very true of the 2099 books.
Yeah.
And I mean that in a very loving way. Sometimes some of them have aged well, some better than others, but holistically speaking, they've become a part of the overall Marvel Universe story. I mean, Miguel O'Hara's traveled to modern times during the Superior Spider-Man stuff. He's obviously been a big player in all the various Spider-Verse stories that have come up. And yeah, he's just got staying power. Right. He's cool. And I credit all of that to Peter David, who 92, 93 was probably at the absolute peak of his writing powers. That's not to say it in the 30, 31 years since then, he's written nothing good. But I mean, there's just that period where he was absolutely untouchable. And that was why Marvel gave him like the flagship title for the 2099 line, which a lot of people may not realize this had actually been percolating in editorial rooms since 1990.
Oh, okay.
It was originally an idea that was devised by John Byrne, of all people. And it just kind of, Byrne came and went as he typically did, mercurially from Marvel's offices, and the ideas sort of stuck around and took other, pardon me, other forms. And eventually they, just in time for Spider-Man's 30th anniversary, they break out Spidey 2099, who really is the first Spider-Man spin-off character, not counting Venom, because Venom was still a bad guy at that point. Instead of, I don't know what the hell he is right now in his own book. It's so convoluted, but not counting Venom, not counting Carnage, but like Spider-Man, not character other than the two Spider Women that had come at that point to to anchor his own book.
Okay. And
be pretty successful with it. Spider-Man 2099 was the first out of the gate, and it was the last of the original line of those 4 books to get the axe by 96. So there was obviously something that was there with that character.
Right.
My son, he's 22. He loves Miguel O'Hara. He's just gravitated to that character ever since he was little for whatever reason. And you got to love it, because the next generation picking up on something that was big when you were a kid is absolutely essential to the passing of the baton. I hope, one of these days your son latches onto a character and carries it on.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Well, especially, in this day age where when we were growing up, right? Like this sort of thing wasn't really mainstream. It was like more of a, it was just like a subculture type of thing. So now that all, superheroes and these comic book movies are so cool now and everything like that. It's going to be more commonplace and easier to kind of do that sort of thing. Anthony Bergamini said Miguel always came off as the bully. Spider-Man looks like the movie is going to go that way too, which I totally agree. That's exactly the kind of vibe we got in the trailer. And then Gabriel De Jesus said he's our first Latin spider, opening the door for I think Ariana and Miles. I don't know if I
Aranya.
Aranya.
And yes. Absolutely. That's very good. That's very good observation there, Gabriel. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So, well, that's good to know about Miguel OHara and his origin story and kind of his powers and things like that. So, so these are the first appearances of the main characters that we're going to see in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse that comes out this weekend. And so let's go ahead and switch gears and talk about the comic books that we're reading. So let me switch this over here and let's start with what our listeners are reading too. Actually, before we get into that, I apologize. Let me actually remind people that, again, this show is part of Comic Watch. So if you are interested in being a reviewer of comics, TV, movies, things like that, we are always looking for people to join our team. So if you're interested, we will have a link in the show notes to the application for you to apply if you want to be a reviewer for us. So we're always looking for great people who can do great reviews. And even if you haven't do a review, we always ask people like maybe, do a couple so we can see what your writing style is like. So even if you haven't done a review like formally or anything like that before, that doesn't put you out of the running by any means whatsoever. We definitely want to have people, for a lot of people on the team, this is like their first step into doing a formal review of comics and media, things like that. So
yeah, absolutely. If I briefly may,
I mean, you're the editor-in-chief. Yes, definitely. Please
do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are an all volunteer site that includes myself. I would love to make money doing this. I assure you, I do not. It's all about blood, sweat, and tears, but it is an outstanding place to cut your teeth and eventually make that next step to a paid site or something else. One of the guys, one of our former editors is now an assistant editor at Valiant. So like this is a great place to make connections, folks.
Agreed. Yes. Yeah. And I'll say this is, since being part of Comic Watch, I've been able to use some of our connections with Comic Watch to be able to connect with some of the other publishers and creators and things like that. So it's definitely getting to talk to and interview comics professionals that write or draw or do whatever with comics that you love is a perk. Yes, definitely. JT the comment said, my review, book is good, go read it. So we probably want a little bit more than that. Yes.
I appreciate your confidence.
Yes. And then the next episode for next week is going to be a review of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which I'm going to have guest host Ellie from the All Day Show to come and help us review that movie as well. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the comics that people are reading. From Comic Watch, we had B-Rat said, I'm reading the 88 Hawk and Dove mini featuring the first appearance of Don Granger as well as the new Titans, starting with Who is Donna Troy and working my way up to the Titans Deathstroke Team Titans Total Chaos storyline. It's good. The Hawk and Dove stuff, seeing Hawk as the Reagan-era Republican takes me back to when I was little, and seeing guys behave exactly this way. Having Liefeld inked by Kessel, I think is how I pronounce your name.
Carl Kessel or Kiesel, I think it might be.
Gotcha. Okay. Was a godsend for his art. Probably some of his best work, thanks to Kiesel. Wish their book would have lasted longer. And then...
That's an interesting little artifact because it came out in '88 when post-crisis DC was still cooling and figuring out what the hell it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so with characters like stupid allergies, sorry.
Right.
With characters like Hawk and Dove that are kind of just barely established anyway, they had a ton of latitude to redefine who they were.
Right.
And a lot of fun little miniseries like this came out of the woodwork from it.
Right. Yeah. And then Anthony Bergamini, who is joining us YouTube Live, said Kirby's New Gods is what he's reading. It actually holds up pretty well and super interesting. There's definitely some weird stuff that no one talks about, like Orion's group of human companions that constantly remind us that they are just humans, but it's still so much fun. And then from the Illumicasters Discord, which, again, if you want to join our Discord, we have a link in the show notes below. Matt from Hopskeek News said he is reading the Hulk Annual #1, was wicked rad, was a found footage style issue that had some cool horror elements in it. Written by David Pepos, which I know we love. David, he's been on this show. He's I think he's been on Comic Watch as well, too.
He's been on Comic Watcher's show twice.
Yes.
So yeah, definite friend of the site. And I'm gonna say this next thing, not because he's a friend of the site, but he is in an incredibly short amount of time become a writer. If his name's on it, I'm gonna grab it.
Yes.
Anyone out there that read Savage Avengers, you read the best Marvel comic, the most marvelous Marvel comic to come out in like the last decade.
Yes.
Oh my God, he's so great. He knows his characters, he knows his continuity, he lives and breathes this stuff. Mm-hmm. You guys watch. In about 3 years, he's either writing Avengers or an X-Men title, in one of the main X-Men titles.
Oh, I'm sure he will. Yeah. And I've heard nothing but great things about this Hulk issue as well, too. And I know he was really excited about the idea.
It's very, very cool. Being able to take the found footage style of movie and translate it faithfully to the page was a pretty monumental task. And he does a very good job with it.
Right. Yeah. ODPH podcast from the Luminacasters Discord as well said Deep Cuts by Image Comics, a very cool depiction of the history of jazz music, which that sounds really cool. And I love that, again, we always associate comics with heroes, but there's so many comic books and stories out there that aren't hero related. That is just a phenomenal story. And it sounds like this is a good example of that one.
Yeah. Kyle Higgins is writing it, and it just looks awesome. Like every issue is oversized, so it's like $6 or $7 a pop.
Yeah.
But just kind of glancing through it, and forgive me, I don't recall who did the art on it, but it looks like one of the best labors of love you're ever going to check out.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the cover itself looks really cool. Let's see here. Joe Loves Comics said, I started the Tokyo Ghost and First Gideon Falls hardcovers on Friday, so I'll be continuing those. Enjoyed the first issues of them. Matt, are you still with us by chance? Okay, here we go. Yeah, your video went off for a second. Yeah.
Allergy emergency. Pardon me.
No, that's okay. Not a problem. But yeah, I haven't heard this one before, but I'll definitely have to check this one out. And then from Twitter, Fet Bizarro said, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Usagi Yojimbo is rad as F. I kind of bleeped it out a little bit because, again, this is a family-friendly show. I also dug Doom Patrol quite a bit. I haven't finished all my comics for this week, though. I'm a huge Ninja Turtles fan, as many of you know, and I got to say, I have not yet read a Usagi Yojimbo issue or crossover, but I mean, just the things I've been hearing from other people and the art that I've seen, like, it's definitely something I know I want to get into at some point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm actually in the same boat. I've never read a Usagi comic. Shame on me. Obviously, Stan Sakai has been doing it for decades, so he must be doing something right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then our last listener share of what they're reading is from Twitter, @YearTheLoser, said, I finally read Strike Force by Howard and Peralta. My God, is what he said. There are so many great moments in this book. Deadpool roasts the entire team. Jessica sucker-kicked Blade on the face for shits and giggles. And Jess assuming no one knows each other, but they all knew her full name. I've never heard of Strike Force before, but just this little summary makes me want to watch. Makes me want to read this now. So I'm probably
I think it ran for 9 issues. It got canceled, unfortunately, and they really hosed over the creative team and didn't publish what would have been the final issue, number 10. Yeah, but it was an oddball comic. It spun out of something, possibly Empire. I'm not 100% sure. Somebody correct me on that. Because I'm probably wrong, but yeah, it was Tenny Howard writing it and Herman Peralta on art. And it's Blade and a very odd assortment of characters just coming together and doing badass things.
Seems like it, yeah. Which is why I'm like, this sounds really interesting. All right, so thank you for everybody who shared what they're reading this week. Matt, let's talk about the comics that you are currently reading.
Yeah, definitely. On top of just regular, pull box stuff. I've been digging into some old school Marvel 2-in-1, and I love I have a huge soft spot for the old school Bronze Age team up style books that Marvel did, and the reason they're just fun, right? There's inherent fun in seeing the Thing in 2-in-1 or Spider-Man in team up. Or, whatever. There were several of the other lesser known titles out there, and just seeing the characters interact. And the reason it's so earnest is because at this point, the Marvel universe is just a hair over a decade old. There's still a lot of foundational stuff cooling. There's a lot of just characters that haven't interacted together yet. Right. And there's just a wholehearted fun in seeing the Thing, who's a character who you can put in any circumstance on a superhero comic setting, and he still works. You cannot say that about very many characters, but you can about Ben Grimm. And just watching him have fun and get into shenanigans and team. Like, why is the Thing teaming up with Shang-Chi? Who cares? It's fun, right? The guy Shang-Chi fights, the Thing can take him out in 2 panels. But it's fun nonetheless, and I just adore the purity of these comics. They're not going to change your life if you read them by any stretch of the imagination, but just for old school rock'em sock'em superheroes, that it's a great go-to for me. The other thing I started reading is
hold on before we get to that.
Yes.
For those who don't know, what's a Marvel 2-in-1?
That's the name of the comic.
But I mean, is there a reason why it's called 2-in-1 though? Like, can you explain what that means?
Oh yes. So the format is the Thing is the core character, although technically it could be anybody. And it's just every issue he teams up with somebody different.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think I've heard of 2-in-1 before, and so I was just kind of curious, like what that.
Dude, look, go fish through some dollar bins. You'll find some 2-in-1s. I guarantee you a good time.
Right.
And I will also just throw out there my standard nugget whenever I'm talking about 2-in-1. Annual number 7 from 1983 is bar none one of the best comics ever. It's got the Thing wearing boxing gloves on the cover. That's all you need to know.
Oh yes, I think I've seen that one before. Yeah, awesome. Okay, sorry. So what was your next one?
A couple weeks ago, DC put out the first of 2 compendium volumes of Sandman Mystery Theater, which was a Vertigo title that ran for 70 issues starting in 1993. It was, I believe, one of the premier Vertigo imprint books. It was written by Matt Wagner and later Wagner and Steven Siegel. And most of the art throughout the series was done by a gentleman named Guy Davis. So for those of you who do not know, Golden Age Sandman, Wesley Dodds, sort of one of those interesting characters that bridges the gap between pulp fiction that was a precursor to comics and then the actual Golden Age comics superheroes. So he's in his first incarnation, he's a guy in a 3-piece suit, a fedora, a trench coat, and a freaking World War I gas mask. And he's got this gas gun that makes people fall asleep. Well, what drives him is he has these nightmares that push him to go after, figure out what the crime is and right some wrongs, et cetera, et cetera. So Basically, what Sandman Mystery Theater is taking that initial concept and turning it into a then modern Pulp Fiction superhero adjacent comic, and it is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Outstanding stuff. I just, for one reason or another, I'd never gotten to Sandman Mystery Theater, even though I love the concept. I love Golden Age superheroes, and I love Matt Wagner.
Yeah.
Just, I just there's only so many comics where I can read, right? And but yeah, DC's done a really good job lately of collecting stuff that not quite ready for an omnibus format because it probably wouldn't sell well enough to justify the cost. So they kind of split the difference and did the compendium, which is a paperback omnibus for all intents and purposes. They recently did the same thing with all 80 issues of Starman by James Robinson. Mm-hmm. So really great read. If you like moody mystery noir type stuff mixed in with your street level superheroes, cannot go wrong with this comic.
Gotcha. That's good to hear. Yeah, I've never heard of, like, I've read the Sandman that was,
and it does have a tangential tie to the Sandman by Neil Gaiman.
Right. Yeah. So that was the only one I've read so far, is that first volume of his, but never the Mystery Theater. So that's,
okay.
That's
so yeah, there was a one shot called Sandman Midnight Theater. Mm-hmm. It was written by Gaiman that formally wed together Morpheus and the Dream World with the Golden Age Sandman, and it's very cool.
Right.
It's Gaiman, right? Of course it's cool.
Awesome.
So what are you reading, Sean?
Yeah, so the comics I'm pulling this week, I'm actually picking up DC Pride 2023, which I absolutely love last year's DC Pride.
Yeah, DC's Pride one shots are like heads and tails better than Marvel's every year.
Right. Yeah. Last year's my favorite stories were the one by Kevin Conroy, which everybody absolutely loved that story.
Absolutely.
And I love Stephanie Phillips' story with Kat Kane as well too, being told from the eyes of her father as well. I absolutely love those two stories. All the
yeah. I had to think back on that one. That was a good one.
Yeah. The other one I'm reading is Spider-Man 2099 Dark Genesis. This is number 5. It's the last one in the series. I've made it, no secret that at this point, the reason why I got it is because I thought Daredevil 2099 was going to be in it. I'm a huge fan of Daredevil 2099, but he has not shown up, and I don't think he will. So it's just one of those things, like, I've committed this far, so I might as well finish it out. It's okay. it's not terrible.
Yeah, 5 issues weekly.
Yeah.
Steve Orlando.
Yeah.
We like Steve.
Yeah, it's definitely a different format and taking stuff like that. Like I said, it's not terrible, but it's not great either. It's just it is what it is. So, I'm also picking up number 4 of Tales from Nottingham, which the Nottingham series from David Hazan has been phenomenal. And then
I have heard nothing but good stuff about that.
Yeah, and the Tales from Nottingham are pretty much spin-off series or spin-off issues to take a character from the main story and just kind of tell like a one-shot story basically of that character. And then the last one I am picking up this week is issue number 1 of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Saturday Morning Adventures Continued, which I'm very excited about because the original Saturday Morning Adventures that came out last year, it was only supposed to be like a 4 or 5 issue series, but because so many people loved it that they decided to go ahead and continue on with another series as well too. So
very cool.
Very, very nostalgic. If you are a kid that grew up with the 1987 Ninja Turtles show and just anything from the 80s and 90s, that's what these things have been. They've been very much like, let's play on the nostalgia of the 80s and 90s, and I absolutely loved it for that reason.
I'm here for that.
Yeah.
as long as it's done for a reason other than just nostalgia.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. No, they do a pretty good job of incorporating that. Okay. Of like telling, it's in the same spirit of the cartoon show.
Right.
But they definitely, it's not kind of a cheap device that they use in there. They definitely kind of really hone into it and make it part of a really fun, silly story, but it's really fun. And I just absolutely loved it. And it's brought back things I completely forgot from my childhood as well too. So it's definitely a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So those are the comics we're reading. Matt, thank you very much for joining the show to talk to us about Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen, and Miguel O'Hara. Before we wrap things up, where can people find you and Comic Watch online?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm on Twitter, the Uncanny Matt at Twitter. Comic Watch, we're also on Twitter. Sean, are we still on Instagram?
I mean, we're on it. Yeah. I mean, I know I haven't really been keeping up with the social media part of it, but we still have an Instagram account.
No worries. We're also on Facebook. And then, you can find us online at comic-watch.com. Fandom news and pro reviews since 2017. We're killing it.
Yes. Yeah, definitely check it out. So, well, again, thank you very much, Matt, and thanks for everybody.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, definitely.
This was fun. I'm happy to do it again anytime.
Good. And thanks for everybody who joined in for the YouTube Live, and tune in for next week's episode when we will review the Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse movie. And that wraps up another episode of The Caption Life. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You can follow us on social media at Caption Life. For more information about us and all of our previous episodes, visit thecaptionlife.com.